Do you have tea today or no?
I have tea brewing. It's not here, but
Perfect. Perfect. What is it when it is finished brewing?
it's just basic chamomile tea.
I've never been able to get on with chamomile.
Really?
Yeah, just something about the flavor is not for me.
I mean, I don't drink it very often. It's definitely not
Mhm.
like a I want this type of, but if I don't know if you can tell, and I don't know if people over the recording will be able to really hear it, but I sound very hoarse, a bit sore.
You don't sound your best.
But usually when I have a sore throat because I've overused it, that's usually when I bring out the chamomile because then I just pour a bunch of honey and then put, ginger in it, and that is supposed to
The
be
honey and ginger I
healing.
can absolutely get behind. I have not tried mixing those with chamomile. I'm going to have to give it a go because
You should
that
try
that
one,
actually sounds pretty good.
and actually it's like a chamomile mixed with lavender, and I don't know if that makes a
Oh,
difference, but yeah, it's like chamomile
interesting.
lavender tea, and it's like okay, this one's actually really good, but, yeah, yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, yeah, so I was like,
I
"Oh,
I have
okay."
a I have a tropical green tea today,
Oh, tropical
which
green
tastes
sounds so lovely.
surprisingly pineapple-y. It's quite tasty. Was not expecting pineapple in the flavor profile, but no, it's
Okay,
good. I like it.
interesting. Okay,
Mhm.
okay, I can get
Yeah.
behind that. Do you have any snacks today?
I don't have snacks today, but it's almost a foregone conclusion that at some point a small child will bring me something for themselves, but they normally bring me something to share as well. So who knows what I'll end up eating as we go.
Nice.
How about you? Are you snacking today or no?
Yeah, I have a bit of this delicious mint chocolate bar that I saved from when I was in Finland. So it's I don't know if it's like a Finnish brand or Scandinavian or whatever, but it is
Scandinavian chocolate is amazing.
it is
Like
so,
one of
I
the
mean, it's
great
like the
unsung
best.
heroes of European culinary experiences.
I mean, people kinda rag on Scandinavia, but after traveling through Scandinavia, I'm like, "Man, they have some good ass food."
Yeah, yeah,
It's,
absolutely.
although some freaked me out because I got to Finland and people were like, "Oh, you have to try their delicacies." And I was like, "What is that?" And they were like, bear, elk, and moose or something." And I was like,
Huh.
Okay." Very
Elk and moose I
dry.
can definitely get behind. Bear is not something I was expecting.
Yeah, me neither. I was kind of shocked, and, luckily, my Finnish friend who was hosting me was like, "It's very dry. I don't like it. You probably won't if you don't like dry meat." And I was like, "No, I don't like dry meat." So she was like, "We could skip that, and why don't you just try, like, reindeer instead?" And I was like, "Sure." And so I tried the reindeer, and it was, you know, I just had to look past the fact I was like, "No, I'm not eating Rudolph and his friends. I'm just eating a random reindeer." So, yeah, anyway, yeah, I have this, great, mint chocolate thing, and it's delicious.
Delightful.
Mhm, mhm. It really
Delightful.
is. It really is, and I'm proud of myself. I, like, saved it because I knew. So when I was in Sweden, like, got all into the culture of having fika, which is, like, their coffee snack break, and
Mhm.
so, yeah, I've saved it now for, like, over a month now, and I've only limited myself to, like, 1 or 2 pieces for fika.
That's excellent.
Thank you.
That is some good self-control.
Thank you. It was really hard, but thank you.
But we are going through the Women of Troy. We just finished going over Silence of the Girls. Women of Troy is the sequel, and we've gone up to chapter 18. And I did, I
Yes.
did, I did cheat. I did read half of chapter 18. Then I was like, no, Megan, stop, stop, because this is next time. You have to stop. We have to talk to Lexi about this first. Um, but yes,
So, anyway, do you wanna start us off maybe with a summary? Because I always love your
yeah,
summaries of what we've read.
absolutely. So as we have probably come to expect through the course of reading Pat Barker's work, it is brutal and sad, very sad, um, beautifully written, has some takes some perspectives that I very much appreciate and that we have not really seen before. And it opens with Pyrrhus in the Trojan horse and kind of narrates the whole sack of Troy, and then cuts to Briseis, and you kind of catch up with her. Like, it's not quite the same as sitting and having a cup of tea with an old friend, but it is nice to like see what she's been up to. And it carries on really where Silence of the Girls left off. The Greek army is stranded. Oh my God. The Greek army is stranded on the beach of Troy. The wind is unfavorable, which surprises absolutely no one, I'm sure. The camp is splintering into factions, and clan-based rivalries are kind of coming to the fore, and it's a very dangerous place for women to be. It was dangerous for women beforehand, but now there's kind of a breakdown of law and order. It's even more dangerous than it was previously. So you get all of that stuff going on. And we read through, I think I said earlier, we read through to chapter 18. And the main thing that has happened that is kind of driving the plot at the moment is that Priam's body, Pyrrhus desecrated it like Achilles did Hector, and his body is just being left on the beach unburied, which, if you know anything about ancient Greek culture, that is a bad thing. His spirit will be wandering and unable to rest because he hasn't been buried. The proper rites haven't been performed. And someone, who knows who, someone has tried to bury the body. And this is a huge, huge problem. And Pyrrhus is super pissed, as you can expect a 16-year-old with some severe daddy issues to be super pissed. So we're kind of getting into the interrogation part of the book with him trying to work out who did that. And we know who did it because one of the conversations that Briseis has with one of the slave girls from Troy, Amina, they walk past Priam and see, I change how I say that. Sorry, I say Priam and I say Priam, and I genuinely have no idea what I'm supposed to be saying, because I think this is another cultural thing. I think the Brits say it one way and the Americans say it the other way, and I just kind of get very confused and stuck in the middle. So if you catch me switching between, I am very sorry. I genuinely don't know what I'm doing. But anyway, Amina is very upset that Priam has been left unburied. He's her king, and Briseis is also very upset because he was also very kind to her. They had a relationship in Silence of the Girls, but she's like, we can't do shit. Like, absolutely not worth the risk to our lives, because it will definitely be a risk to our lives. So you know that Amina is the one who tried to bury him. And that's kind of where chapter 18 leaves off. But what the book is doing, or has done up to this point, has been Briseis going around to all of the different women from Troy, mostly the royal women, obviously, because they're the people she's familiar with, they're the people the reader is familiar with, and trying where she can to offer comfort to them. She's been in their position. She is no longer a slave. If we remember from Silence of the Girls, she was married. Achilles married her off quite unceremoniously, but she is married. She is also pregnant with Achilles' child, which is a whole can of worms all by itself. So she's now a respectable married Greek matron. So she has more freedom to go around and check in on all of these different slave women. But she's not, I would not term her happy, which again is a surprise to absolutely no one. I don't think anyone really would be happy in this particular situation. So you get, as you're going through the story, you get glimpses of all of the different women and to hear about their experiences and how they're faring in the Greek camp. And you also get the odd chapter here and there from a man's perspective. All of the main story is Briseis, but then you have the odd man here and there kind of butting in as men sometimes do. There will be comments, I'm sure. But you have Pyrrhus a couple of times. Calchas, the Trojan priest, comes in. And I thought that actually opening the book with Pyrrhus was a really interesting choice, because I was expecting Briseis from the get-go. And it's not. It's this person inside the Trojan horse. And it takes a couple of paragraphs for you really to work out who this kid is and what the hell he's doing. And he is not someone we've seen an awful lot of in previous adaptations. I don't think he turns up. Absolutely. But this is the first time we really hear from him. And he clearly has the world's biggest chip on his shoulder. And he's feeling very disrespected and disheartened because he's just a child and he's the son of the great Achilles. And really he should have his own songs being written about him, but he hasn't done anything worthy of songs yet. So he's determined to make the fall of Troy his like entry into heroic life. So you get him brutally killing Priam and doing it very poorly by all accounts. He has to try at least twice to cut Priam's head, cut his throat and kill him. And Priam like laughs at him, which I enjoyed. That did amuse me. Yeah, so you get Pyrrhus, and then you also get Pyrrhus from the perspective. You also get Pyrrhus from the perspective of Briseis, which is very interesting because you have this peek into Pyrrhus's head, so you know how he views himself, and then you have Briseis narrating what she thinks of him, and the two things are very different. He definitely comes across as a petulant child from other perspectives, and he's it's funny because he's trying his best to fight against that view, to remove that viewpoint from other people, and he's just everything he does seemingly just plays into it. So that was a very long summary. Sorry.
No, I mean, I think
Lexi,
it's
what do you
fine.
think?
Yeah, I did wanna kinda zero in on that opening 'cause, I was gonna ask you if you were just as confused as I because, obviously, as we've established through this year, I mostly listen to these audiobooks being read to me, which can be great, but also a bit distracting if you're, like, doing something else, 'cause I feel like it goes kinda fast, and then you're like, "Wait, what? Did I just miss something?" So, it might have taken me more than a paragraph to figure out who on earth this what I thought it was Odysseus. I was literally just like, is this Odysseus? Like, what's going on?" So, yeah, so then to learn that it's Pierce, I was like, "Oh, okay, this is weird." Um, yeah, it's
Well, I mean, I'm just looking at it now. It doesn't. It's a full two paragraphs before you get his name, and I think that's probably deliberately done.
yeah, I think it is meant to confuse. But, I mean, it was very well done, and I kinda liked seeing from his perspective well, you never hear of the people in the horse, and so I really like this sort of very graphic description of, um like a perspective I never would have thought about is, what happens to the guys who are, like, crammed in this horse hiding when they're trying to, like, pull it into the city, and the fact that she takes the time to be like, "Oh, yeah, they were being bumped around, they were trying to be silent, not move, have their armor clatter, and everyone is super sick," and I was like,
The latrine
"Oh."
buckets are full because you can't empty them. I was like, that is a piece of detail I had never considered before. I very true. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was like, "Okay," so and if you puke, I mean, you can't puke quietly, so I'm kinda like, "Oh, well, I hope that if they're motion sick, they didn't get sick enough to puke their guts out because they would have been heard?" Unless the partying in the city was really loud, I have no idea. These are things I don't think about. But yeah, so it was really interesting to sort of have that opening, and then I was really intrigued by, yeah, his failure to basically kill Priam, but I felt it was a bit unfinished just 'cause it was like, he kind of announces himself and says, "I am the son of Achilles, blah, blah, blah,
And
blah,
he says
blah."
it because and this he says like his internal monologue is, this is what you do when you battle someone, you announce who you are. And I'm like, oh honey, you are a child. You're going by the playbook you've been taught.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's exactly what you'd expect from a 16-year-old, but it was just interesting how I kind of expected Priam to say something or do something, but the representation was just like, "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry," and then he just, like, jumps on him. I'm like, "Oh, you're not gonna oh, okay." Um, yeah, so the failure to, like, kill him quickly but I love the description of, he was in a rage. He felt Achilles' blood running through his veins, and then suddenly he gets to this old, frail king who looks like he's, about to drop dead in 2 seconds anyway on his own. Um, like, the anger drains away, and then he doesn't have the strength, and then it takes Priam basically, like, pissing him off to somehow enable him, it was just like it's almost very moving. I'm like, 'cause I was like, "Okay, well, um, it's not gonna be easy to kill an old man, a frail old man." Then again, I'm not an epic Greek warrior, I'm not the son of Achilles, but just considering modern warfare, it's not probably easy to kill an old man who's, like, helpless because apparently this Prime, unlike all the other adaptations where you have, like, them valiantly making the last stand with the sword or "Strap on my armor one last time." No, it's like he's just he's unarmed and he just kind of stands there and is like,
Yeah.
"Okay,
Well,
I'm
it
gonna die."
says it says he's in his armor, but it looks like he's about to collapse from the weight of it.
Oh, that's right.
It's
Well,
like,
either way, it's like you
oh yeah,
expect kind of like a big duel or some
hmm
sort of valiant last
there's
stand.
zero fight in him.
There's nothing. I mean, it just, like, drains away, and he's like, "Okay, okay." So, yeah, I was not expecting that. Um, so I did like the opening, and then when it finally shifts to Briseis, we kinda pick up where the first novel ended. Um, I think one thing I was really excited about, though, once we started getting to the camp, I think that well, you can kinda split the chapters based on which woman she goes to see, but, um I don't know. I still don't know whether I enjoy the Andromache or the Helen chapter, and the thing is you never hear about Helen or from her after, and I love what she did with Helen. Although it did kind of bother me that she kind of kept referring to her as, "Well, she's sleeping with Menelaus again, and now she's gone back to being Helen, Queen of the Argives," and I'm like, "But wasn't I mean, but I was like, why wouldn't you just call her Queen of Sparta? Because that's what she was, especially if she's, like, back with her crazy husband who is yeah, like, sleeping with her again after, he vowed to, like, have her stoned or that he would just murder her, and now he's acting like nothing is changed, and, um, they have Helen's like, this Helen is just so different from, like, our adaptations. I mean, we had the beautiful Troy Fall of a City where basically everyone dies, and then she's like, "Well, you can take my body back, but I don't my heart is here and I loved Paris," and this version is like, "Oh yeah, I was raped and I didn't love Paris really, sort of." But then they had her, like, flirting with Hector because Hector had a flame for her, and just, like, the characterization of her went so far out of, like, what I was expecting. Like, were you as shocked as I was about her, like, characterization of Helen?
I think Pat Barker does an excellent job of making Helen both extraordinarily manipulative from what we hear about her from everybody else, because everyone has something to say about Helen. And one of the recurring themes from the women of Troy that Briseis goes and speaks to is that no one likes Helen. Everybody hates her. Everyone in the camp hates her. All of the women hate her. No one likes Helen. And you know what? Fair enough. Not going to blame or judge for that. But while making her a manipulative survivor, because I think that's possibly what we're going for here, the chapter where Helen actually makes an appearance and speaks for herself, Pat does an excellent job of actually making her sympathetic. Um, Not massively so, but in a world where women have zero agency and really the only control they have is how they can influence the men in their lives through their looks, through the children they produce. And because Helen is the most beautiful of all women, she has that power. But at the moment, it seems like it is working to her disadvantage. She's still alive, which I think is a testimony to how she's able to control Menelaus. But as Briseis talks to her, she doesn't say it, but Pat describes how her veil falls down a little bit, and you can see a ring of bruising around her neck. And then she stands in a particular way, and Briseis can see the bruising goes all the way down her torso. So this is a heavily abused woman who, yes, she's the cause of a war. Well, we could argue whether Helen is the cause of the war or if male pride is the cause of the war, but a war was fought over her. And now she is doing her best to literally just stay alive, um, in a world where not only does everyone hate her, but she has no power, no authority on her own, like of herself. and the only way she can stay alive is by keeping Menelaus sexually interested in her. But that sexual interest is apparently coming along with an awful lot of abuse. And Briseis, like her inner monologue says, like Menelaus is throttling her essentially while he fucks her. And that is, yes. And you kind of expect that kind of, like, the other representations we've seen where he takes her back, clearly he's not happy. There's going to be a physical retribution going on there somehow. But I think what Pat does, as with Silence of the Girls, she brings that implied or assumed trauma and slaps you in the face with it. Like, we're not going to be subtle. We're not going to be like, there's no innuendo here. This is abuse. This is what's happening. And you kind of have to deal with it. And I think that, again, manages to make Helen sympathetic. And we've said before, like, Helen is generally not someone either of us enjoy or sympathize with an awful lot. This Helen, I don't like her, but I do sympathize with her.
Which is a feat in itself, I suppose, because no other adaptation that we've seen so far. I mean, really, I just don't like her, and I don't really find her
Mm-hmm.
at all I mean, the closest I suppose I got was Fall of a City, but even then, I was
Mm-hmm.
still just like, I don't like you.
She
You're
was,
just
yeah, she was still very irritating, and very, very much like, and we said it when we went through the series, but she's very, I can't believe all these bad things are happening because of me. You can fix it, sweetheart. You can fix it. And it's made clear that she could just walk out of the city and go home. And that is something that is also said by one of the other women. She could have left. So you're kind of left wondering why she didn't. Did she love Paris? Did she just think that she was choosing the winning side? Who knows? I suspect we won't get an answer to that.
she's just like picking a ton of gray. Like everything about her I like it sounds like so bad and so weird, but I don't know why I've just been in this funny headspace, but I'm like I just want to like sit her down and be like, "Honey, your aura is gray. You got to fix this because I don't know what this is about, okay? Like your aura is so gray. Get over it." So, I don't know why I'm thinking about auras. I'm not that kind of a person normally, but I was just like, "Okay, I can't." Like, as I'm, listening to her talk or being described, I'm just like, "Oh my god." Like, yes, I feel bad because I'm like, obviously she has no power, and to blame a whole war on just her is unfair because
It's a lot. Yeah.
as we've
And
established,
like, Menelaus
like
isn't just blaming the war on her, he's blaming the breakdown of his relationship with his brother on her. I'm like, dude, that's you. That is all you. He's like, Agamemnon is pissed because you've taken Helen back. He's like, that was your choice.
she just gets a lot of shit, and, like, I understand that, but I'm also like, okay, but as we've established as well, Paris also didn't have to well, depending on adaptation, he didn't have to take her. You could have
Yeah.
been like, "Okay, we'll have a sexy fling while I'm here on diplomacy, and then I'm gonna go across the sea, bye-bye." Um, so, yeah, I was like, well, whether she went of her own volition or was, like, convinced to go, whatever, but I'm like, she gets the blame. No one talks about Paris. Everyone's like, no, it's Helen for being this traitor sort of slag. I don't know. Like it's just um so in that regard I do feel bad.
I will be interested to see in the rest of the second half of the book if there's a reason given for her leaving, because most other adaptations have kind of at least touched on it. And we've not got there. Excuse me. We've not got there with this one.
Although I don't know, because the way that the first half went, I'm kind of like I feel like we're just gonna get one little thing from each woman, and I don't really think they're gonna I would love to actually hear from Helen again. I think because she's put a chapter already, like, there is an opening to hear more from Helen's own words or to do more with her. I'm just not sure that there's enough, room within what's written, so, but I would love to see more of her. But it's interesting because I was kind of as I was reading her or listening to her, I was kind of contrasting it with what happened to Andromache, right?
Yes, we should talk about her.
Because it's, like, super different because also, again, with, like, Pat Barker sort of changing certain things depending on how she wants to portray them for her narrative. Um, Andromache also gets a lot of things said about her in addition to hearing from her. So it was quite interesting to hear how the description of her marriage to Hector is not like anything else we've read or seen. I mean, because I think in this one they said she was like 16 and he was like 35 or he was like in his mid 30s or whatever. And so they're like, "Oh yes, and she married him and he was always respectful, but also he had all these concubines and this, that, and the other thing."
Was mostly in love with
And
Helen.
and I was like, "Well, that's really different from anything because every other adaptation is like, no, he treasured and adored Andromache and
She was his equal partner, and yeah.
exactly." And it's like, he's the heir, the son, whatever. So I was quite shocked to hear this different representation of her. And, like, she's already a very sympathetic person, but, like, this made me actually feel worse for her.
And especially coming off of Troy Fall of a City, the Andromache in that, she's so strong. She's so set in who she is and what she wants. And she is Hector's equal. That they're a pair. They come as a team. And having that and then contrasting it to the Andromache we get here, who is very she she feels young still. She feels young. And she's described as like pale and quiet, and as you would be, deeply traumatized by everything that's happened to her. And it's like there's no fight left in her anymore. And it's, yeah, very, very different.
I don't know, like, did you feel yourself, like, feeling more sympathy or just, like, sympathy's the same?
I think it was sympathy in a different way because with, again, if we go back to Fall of a City, that woman loses her husband, who's clearly the love of her life, and her child and her home. And the child, they make such a big deal of the difficulties they've had conceiving and how much this baby is wanted. So that is tragic in and of itself. This Andromache, I don't feel like there's the same mourning for the husband because their relationship is not portrayed as anything like the same. But it, I feel like it makes the loss of Astyanax so much more poignant because he was everything she had. And now she has just nothing. And she's more, because it's the aftermath. There's obviously a different focus to Fall of a City, but there's much more of a thing made of Andromache being given to Pyrrhus, who she tells Briseis killed her son, asked to kill her son as a reward, which is all kinds of fucked up, but asked to kill her baby. And now she's stuck with the bastards. And he, I mean, is a 16-year-old kid who's got some of his own issues going on, and like calls her to have sex with him once, and it sounds like it didn't go terribly well. I mean, she comes out of it not brutalized, but still having been raped. Um, and she, like, this is her life now. And yeah, it's sympathy for both, but sympathy in slightly different places, I think.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then I'm not trying to remember. I can't remember the sequence. I had to just listen to it so fast. But was Hecuba next?
um yeah, because Andromache and Hecuba, the stories kind of are interspersed between each other. So there's Andromache stuff, then Hecuba, then Andromache. But yeah, she's again very different to everything. I mean, as opposed to Troy, the 2004 movie, she actually exists, which is delightful. Always a good thing to see characters existing when they should. But she's,
So different from the Fall of a City version.
yeah, yeah, she's an old lady, and she's an imperious old lady. She sounds fantastic and is plotting to try and kill Helen, which is like Wow.
But also she's not even like the Fall of a City one because it's like that one she's described as like, Troy is this like super egalitarian more,
Mhm.
not okay, slightly more egalitarian with its women if they're royal women,
Mhm.
like not slaves and stuff. But because in Fall of a City, she was presented kind of as basically the partner and the counterweight to Priam, and she really like her opinion mattered, and he wouldn't do anything without kind of consulting her. And in this one, you kind of hear like a very different story. Like there was an age gap, I think, between them as well. Um, but like she would beguile him, and so being married for so long, like he definitely always kept her around, even though he had a horde of other concubines and stuff.
They seem to have still had that same, I mean, I think as maybe is inevitable if you're, well, not necessarily inevitable, unsurprising if you're married for so long and you have a amicable relationship. Let's start there. But the end result of Priam dying, you have that Hecuba's reaction in Fall of a City is obviously one of devastation. But then in The Women of Troy, when Hecuba manages to get to the beach, and Pat Barker describes it beautifully, she is like, they're on the beach, they're being blasted with this wind and sea spray, and she just like starts mourning and screaming and shouting for her lost family and just yelling Priam's name. And her response brings all of the other Trojan women out of the camp to mourn with her. And it's it was very powerful for me because in the ancient world, it's again painting very broad brushstrokes here. It is very common for mourning to be a woman's responsibility and to be women's work. You get women like smearing their faces with ashes, crying, yelling, screaming, carrying on, all this stuff. So this is very much in keeping with what you would expect, but seeing it or having it described on such a personal level as seeing this woman mourning for her husband and for all of the children she has lost and for her home, it was very well written and moving, and I think gave a really good um, it painted a really realistic picture of how Hecuba feels, I think.
Yeah, and then I mean they still have her talking about Polyxena, um,
Mhm.
being sacrificed and given over to Pyrrhus, and most adaptations don't really include Polyxena. They're just kind of like,
Mhm.
okay, well, she's unimportant, so goodbye. Yeah, although yeah, she was interesting to read or to hear, because she was a lot more calculating than I thought. I love how sassy she is. Um, like, she's kind of like, "Oh, Briseis, you've, like, done well for yourself." Um, and then actually I really loved her interactions with Calchas because basically from Calchas's point of view when it switches kind of to him for a little bit, he's all like, "Well, she's a slave essentially. She lives in a hovel. She's old. She's Odysseus's prisoner. She's got like nothing, and I don't have to like show her this deference that she had as the queen." And in her mind, she's like, "No, I'm still your queen, like, you should still bow to me on the way out." And so I love this the hilarity of him kind of figuring out, like he goes and talks to her and then, like, bows and starts to sort of walk out of the room backwards, and then he's like, "Wait, what the hell am I doing?" Like, like and then she's described as basically sort of chuckling as he's, like, suddenly making up his mind to not do this deferential thing. And then it was really interesting how, yeah, she really, she's in this place, and then suddenly, Briseis goes in, and she's like, "Yeah, I want to see my daughter." And she's like, "Ha, yeah, good luck." Um, yeah, yeah, Cassandra, she's mentioned a lot in the early books, isn't she? Like way more than before, but they still kind of allude to the fact that like she's still babbling about prophecies. I loved the part about the she's afraid of nets.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
and always has been. You know, like knowing what
yeah,
happens
like
to Agamemnon. Yeah,
yeah, but also I think in classic Pat Barker style where things are viscerally told, um there's this one sequence where she's essentially describing how the fear goes back and like even when she was a child and they would put the nets over to um help the kids not get bitten up by bugs at night. And then when she viscerally talking about how she refused this net and then she has sat Cassandra down and counted 47 mosquito bites, and the fact that she was like writhing in agony during the day and still refuses the net. That got me because I was like, okay, I'm just having all goosebumps all over now because I I'm that one person in my family who the bugs love, and, like, so I could go out in any time basically, and, I'll be out for 15 minutes, and I'll come back with, like, 20 bug bites, and, like, my dad or whatever will have, like, none. It doesn't matter, like, what I'm wearing, what I'm doing, I will just be eaten, and so having that sort of brought to the fore so viscerally, that really got a reaction out of me. I was like, "Oh shit, man, that's me." Like, I'd be the one with 47 bites, and, like, knowing how uncomfortable and terrible that is, I'm not sure I'd be refusing that net, like, I think I would take the net, but then again, I'm not cursed with foresight, so, uh,
yeah.
you know, um,
And
yeah,
we do
it's
then see Cassandra after Briseis talks to Hecuba about her. We do get to see her, which is cool because I don't think there are really any other adaptations that have. Well, no, she appears in them, but like especially with Fall of a City, it's she's so damaged that there's not a lot.
no, we heard from or saw her in, ships, didn't we?
Yeah, but it wasn't. I feel like we got a lot more of non-crazy or non-prophesying Cassandra, and her chapter in Women of Troy isn't huge, but like she gives an account of her rape and her relationship with her mother, and I feel like there was more lucidity here, so you get a feeling more for who she is rather than just this plot device who yells about prophecies.
That's true. Although, do we think that it's really, like, down to what adaptation and what is the goal of the author? Because it's like, here, clearly we're trying to talk about and go into the stories of the women specifically of Troy, so obviously Cassandra as a survivor would be, on that list versus a different adaptation that's, like, not centered on the women, so they it just doesn't really make sense. Like, I'm just trying to think to, like, Fall of a City, like, where would we put in a thing about her and have it not sort of stand out as weird or awkward, you know?
Oh yeah, sure. And I think one of the strengths of having, or one of the things you can do when you're looking specifically at the aftermath is that in I feel like in the Iliad, so much of Cassandra is just this harbinger of doom, and she doesn't do a whole lot, and there's so much more story focused around other people. The strength of doing an after story essentially is that there's not a lot going on plot wise. They're sitting on a
Mm.
beach, like they've been sitting on a beach for half the book. So it gives you a lot more room to develop these characters who don't necessarily have a lot to say in the war itself. So I think that's definitely something that this book has space for that maybe others haven't.
Wouldn't
What
necessarily.
yeah. One of
Yeah.
again going with Pat Barker's unique, brutal perspective on things, I found it um, one of the things that really stood out to me about Cassandra's account of her rape was her saying, like, I was on my period.
Mm.
And that like that didn't stop him, and that's something that I wouldn't even have wanted my sister, like I wouldn't even have been comfortable speaking with my sister about, and this man just completely ignores it and does what the hell he wants. And it was just the shortest of sentences, but I feel like that's something that you probably wouldn't get from a male author or a male filmmaker. And it was a really interesting tiny added dimension for me.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. We definitely wouldn't have gotten it from a male storyteller. Um, yeah, it adds a layer of depth to the harrowing sort of vibe that Pat Barker obviously wants to go into, because she does not shy away from these, like, really sort of horrifyingly blatant things. The the only thing that sort of, like, I don't wanna say it, like, took away from, because it didn't take away from anything. That's, like, not the right way, but basically just kind of thinking from, like, a very contemporary perspective, um, like, just, like, being real, like, a ton of women have sex on their period, like, it's not that big of a deal, and so, just because of, like, that and coming from this contemporary thing, I was kind of like, "Well, okay, well, like, taking her when she's on her period in and of itself, like, that's not, like, strange, it's not, something completely unexpected. I mean, who knows? Some guys even today are like, "Ew, no, I don't want it, it's blood, it's whatever," and some are like, "I don't fucking care." So, I guess just, like, in and of itself, I was like, "Okay, well, that's unfortunate that she was on it," but
Mm-hmm.
definitely to me, I don't see it as, like, a big deterrent, just considering a lot of people do it anyway. But I guess it does add a dimension to, like, show her innocence, because if she really is, like, a young girl, we've been there. Like, any young girl could probably be like, "Oh, yeah," like, in my first, year or 2 of having my period, you're still not, like, comfortable with it, you're still a bit, shy, or,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily, like, embarrassed, but you're just shy, or, whatever. So, like, yeah, having this foreign man who's very violent and terrible coming in when you're still coming to terms with this really super personal thing of yours, and ignoring it anyway, because I'm like, "Okay, fine. Well, yeah, I suppose, like, yeah, what young girl who's on her, like, first year, I'm gonna assume she's, like, in her first year of her period or something like that, so, like, but yeah, like, what young girl in her first year of her period would be like, "Yep, I'm cool, let's have sex during my period, like, this is totally normal." Like, no girl is gonna be like, "Yeah." So, no, I kinda see from both sides, but it does add a
So
dimension.
I think what I was keying off of, and I don't know a lot about purity culture or purity laws in ancient Greece, but I know that in some cultures and some ancient cultures, you do not have sex with a woman when she's on her period for like religious purity, essentially. And there are like rites that you have to go through after your period to make sure that you are like clean or cleansed or whatever the hell patriarchal terminology we're using. So I what was going through my brain when I came across that bit was, not only is it a violation of her personal bodily autonomy, it's also a violation of cultural religious norms. I don't know if it actually is, because I'm not familiar enough with the time period, but that's kind of what I was getting from that.
I would say, and again, I'm not an expert in either this time period or on purity law. Like, yeah, that's not what I studied, but I would just say, like, based on what I do know of ancient Greece, just generally, these were some of the more sexually liberated people who I feel like wouldn't, like, to me, they wouldn't care as much as, like, August in Rome. I mean, Augustus came in and he was like, "Oh my god, you are all salacious and horrible, and now I must make you proper." And, like, he freaking did all that shit to his own sister Julia because she was too promiscuous, and he was like, "Oh, it's such a shame." So, um, and then I feel like in the Middle East, perhaps, they would put a higher value on religious purity, stuff like that. Because I know that the Greeks would often, I mean, they dressed in like, freaking skirts and dresses, right? Togas. So, um, because I remember during the Persian Wars, you would often hear that, like, the Greeks found the Persians wearing pants to be strange. Like, why would you cover up your body? Like, what is wrong with seeing skin? So it's just like, okay, maybe if this were in like Persia or something, or Rome after Augustus, that would be a much bigger deal. But I feel like, especially this early in Greece. I mean, it's a valid point, and especially if we're gonna think about it from a more modern perspective, in addition to how the ancient world would have seen it, I think it's a completely valid and a really good point to bring up, because maybe it's because of my knowledge of Greece in what I studied, that I didn't think of it the way you did, but I think it's equally valid, because that is, like, totally a thing that could have been, a thing. Um, but yeah, I don't know.
We should talk about, because we really haven't touched on Briseis
Mm.
and how she is running, interacting with the slave women, the new slave women in the camp,
Mm.
because that was a really interesting dynamic that I hadn't thought about and wasn't expecting. And I wanted to know what your thoughts are on it.
Yeah, well, and actually, I do wanna throw in, as well, her account of her experience being pregnant, because that I think that hit me almost harder than her relationship with the slaves, because as she's trying to come to terms with her own, like, because I think, who was it? It was like Andromache or something, who was basically just made a very poignant comment and said, like, "How are we supposed to love their children?"
Yeah, exactly.
Which really struck me, because I'm like, "Well, I mean, yeah, okay, they fathered it," but I'm like, "But you're the one who had to carry the child for 9 months, like, it's growing in you." So, like, what we're taught about, like, unconditional love for a child, I mean, maybe, look, it's probably different if you've been raped, like, well, not probably, it is different, but I feel like in that time when they didn't have the agency to just, go out to their local Planned Parenthood and, get it taken care of, and they're trapped in this world where, like, they have no power, and so they're expected to have the child. So in that time period, you can't just be like, "No, I don't want it. I was raped. It's not my responsibility." No, this is, like, still your child, and it is pretty much your shield against stuff. And so she talks about this child being her shield. Like, she talks very, much about how she would have been sold off as one of Achilles' funeral game prizes if she hadn't been pregnant, and it's the only reason that she was able to survive and be married off and become a woman, sort of with any agency, more power. Um, but it was very striking to hear her talk about, "Oh, it's like a parasite. It's in me, but I hate it, and it's leeching what it needs off of me as it's also being my shield." And so that was really striking for me, because jokingly in my own life, I'm kind of like, I don't wanna be pregnant. I don't wanna put my body through that. I just think it would be a terrible experience. I'm happy to adopt kids, right? So hearing that, it was kind of like justifying my own preconceptions about the experience, but I'm curious to hear from you about it, because you chose to have your children, and obviously, like, wonderful things. So, not everyone thinks about it the way I do. So I was very interested to hear, like, what you think about her own sort of coming to terms with the fact that she's pregnant with this thing that she basically calls a parasite leeching on her.
Yeah. I very, very sympathetic, honestly. Pregnancy is hard. I had three relatively easy pregnancies. Even so, I've had twins. That was harder, but I was very lucky. I'm a very healthy person. My body deals pretty well with being pregnant, but it's hard, and it's something you can never escape. You can't sleep. Oftentimes, you either want to eat everything or you don't want to eat anything at all. So that's a whole exciting thing. You're constantly exhausted, and you can't get comfortable. And that's just like the physical stuff. Like going up and down stairs is hard, and getting up and walking is hard. And I had all of that, and I had the comfort of knowing that these were children I wanted. And this was planned. This was something my husband and I were doing deliberately. And I had a say in that. And I could have very easily said, I don't want children, or I want one child. And that would have been okay. There wouldn't have been repercussions for me. And the thought of being pregnant against my will and being forced to carry a child to term against my will, it's a form of assault. I truly believe that. And to get, as I'm sure some people will view it, political and woke, I think what's going on in the US and in other parts of the world with abortion access is criminal and a form of assault against women, because no one should ever be forced to carry a child that they do not want, because it is invasive, it is physically, emotionally, mentally hard. It changes your brain's chemistry permanently, it changes your body's makeup permanently, and it should be a choice that the person with a uterus carrying the child makes. No one can make that choice for you, period, ever. Absolutely not. So having Briseis and Andromache talking about how do you do this? How do you love a child that you don't want, that is born of rape, that is the child of the man who killed your husband, killed your children, destroyed your whole entire world? How do you do that? And logically, right, you know that the babies, the fetuses, are innocent. They have no responsibility, and it's not their fault. But as someone who's been through all of that, how do you reconcile what's going on inside your body that you have no say over with the child that will eventually be there and that you're going to have to raise? And it may have been easier for aristocratic women who had wet nurses and servants and people to help with that kind of thing, but that wouldn't have been the reality for everybody. And Briseis kind of trying to come to terms with a pregnancy that she doesn't want, and feeling like, and it kind of, it's very subtly woven in throughout the story, how everyone else is reacting to her pregnancy. And she says that men like reach out and touch her belly because she's carrying Achilles' child. And she says that she's sure that the men are convinced that she must be so thrilled to be the chosen woman who gets to carry Achilles' child. And like, the only worth she has is as the bearer of Achilles' kid. And on the one hand, it's kind of nice because no one's groping her anymore, which is great. But on the other hand, the only value she has is because she has a uterus and she's pregnant with a famous man's child. And it's very interesting, and I think very well done. And
I think she says she's a casket, right? Like, she's a casket with a child or something, very powerful.
yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah,
I really appreciated Pat Barker going into that. And I think having that conversation be between Andromache and Briseis was a really good choice.
'cause she know, because 'cause they're both in such unique, positions. Because we have Briseis, who basically Achilles killed her husband and her brothers, and now she's having his child, and says, like, um, "The Myrmidons are more excited about this than I am because I feel like it's the Myrmidons' child, not my child." But then you then have Andromache, who's not, as of yet, pregnant, but you know that she's the property of the man who killed her husband and then threw her son off the wall. Um, I'm like, well, there's actually, I mean, I'm not about to start comparing what's worse, killing your husband, throwing a child off the wall versus killing your husband and brothers. Um, but yeah, so I'm just like, they're both in these unique positions, obviously different, but I really appreciate it because I think it's something we don't talk about. It's taboo, and you kind of just beat around the bush.
Yeah. And I feel like so often as well, when this kind of thing pops up in literature, being pregnant is something to take comfort from. Right? It's portrayed as, oh, I had this horrible traumatic thing happen to me, but at least I get a baby and something to love, and oh yay. And for some women, I'm sure that is true. But it was really refreshing to see the opposite, and I feel more realistic or more honest,
No, it
maybe.
is more honest because, I mean, even in our own culture, bouncing off what you were talking about, that's literally the excuse that the pro-life movement uses, which is, "Oh, you've been raped. Oh, you've been this or that, or whatever happened." They're like, "Oh, no, 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 no." They're like, "You need to rejoice because you've been gifted with this beautiful little life, and you need
Yeah.
to raise it, and look, you get to, like, be a blank slate," and you're
Something
like,
good has come out of something horrific. And you're like, well, I don't want a child. This is a lifelong commitment that I didn't choose, that I do not want. And I might die during childbirth. So, you know what? Actually, no. But thank
yeah, I'm
you.
like, it's they always say it's a gift. A child is never a burden. It's a gift. And I'm like, you know what? No, it feels like a fucking anchor around your neck unless you want to do. And the thing that it's
Yeah.
like, it's one thing if something bad happens, but at least you might have like a supportive partner or something who's like willing to help. These women didn't have that. These women were like,
They've got no one. Yeah.
I don't have a choice. I don't have a partner who's going to be stepping up and, helping mommy get around. No, this is like, "Oh, haha, that sucks for you." It's a gift, that you have to take care of on your own. Good luck. So no, I definitely, I think it was very realistic, and I really appreciate this take on it because as someone who never wants to have her own children, I want children, I just don't want my own. Um, Even with, like, a supportive partner in my life, I would definitely be one of those, like, if I somehow accidentally got pregnant, and people are like, "Oh, it's like joy, what a gift." I'd be like, "No, it's not. It's still a fucking anchor," and no. So, no, I very much appreciated it. And, I also then bouncing into lastly, just, her relationship with the other slave women, um that I felt was really realistic as well because I do like the portrayal of kind of this, um, sense of guilt that like survivor's guilt basically that, um,
Yeah.
it would be so easy for Briseis as someone who kind of made it. She got married off, and so now she has privilege, and she does make a big deal about talking about, this girl she has who has to follow her. She doesn't wanna call her slave, but she says, "Well, I need a chaperone," but she acts like a slave, and even when she talks to her other friend, she's like, "Oh, is this your slave girl? Is this your handmaid?" She's like, "No, she's not," and then
No,
she,
it's not. Well, actually, sorry, she really is. Like, you're her owner. I mean, she may technically belong to your husband or to your husband's boss, but
it was a bit harrowing to hear, like, this account where she wants to bond, she wants to try to make overtures, and so she tries to, like, slow down at one point to walk near her, but then she slows down too much, so then she, like, maintains the distance, and she's like, "You know what? This is just not working." Like, okay. Um, yeah, I felt real bad. Like, you want to try to
it's a really
salvage this
complex
old life.
dynamic.
Yeah, because it's like you're trying
Yeah.
to salvage some of, like, I was 'cause she's like, "I sympathize, like, I was where you were, so you should turn to me, or I hope you would turn to me for comfort because I can give you
Hmm.
advice about surviving," when they're like, I'm not interested. You
Yeah,
have
I
this."
can't trust you. Actually, sorry. You're married to my owner, or you're not someone I can trust.
She's like, "You may have been where I was, but you're not now, and I'm sure that kind of affects the whole, like, well, you made it, but I'm never going to, so I might as well just not talk to you about it because it's almost like a false hope type of thing."
Yeah,
Um
and I think and something that Briseis does bring up semi regularly is that she was, I can't believe I'm saying this, she was lucky because she was Achilles' favorite. And that gave her a status, even as a slave, that gave her a status above what any of the women in the camp currently have. And then she was like elevated to free Greek, in inverted commas, wife, which is a fate that probably none of those women will get. I mean, we know that, I mean, maybe further down the road, Andromache, but generally a lot of the women in that camp are going to stay slaves. They don't have a path out. And it's not really like, how do you form a friendship with your mistress, essentially? Is it wise to even do that? So I think there's a lot of self-preservation going on there in the part of the other women. And I really appreciate Briseis trying so hard. It totally fits with her character in the way that she cares for Andromache after her first night with Pyrrhus and continues to care for her. And I think that a lot of that dynamic is because of a status thing. I think that's an added layer of complexity in the whole relationship with Amina with the maid. She's not royal. Briseis was royalty, she was aristocracy. Andromache was royalty, she was aristocracy. There was an equality there to begin with. And while Briseis is now not a slave anymore, she and Andromache is still on much closer to the same level. So I think it's probably much easier for Andromache to take the care and the love and the support that Briseis is offering. And also because I think Andromache probably has that path out, like marriage to a Greek warrior is far more likely for her than for the other women in the camp. So that might play into it as well.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I did want to kind of emphasize was also I think what Pat Barker does really well is, we hear about and someone will sort of mention in like a buzzword way, like bonds of female friendship in times of, great adversity or whatever. Um, but no one kind of knows what that means usually. And if they do try to guess, they're like, oh, that's just like women bonding and being friends, right? And I mean, I guess sometimes sure, but no, what I love is that like you could technically use that to describe that like this book is basically an exploration of the ties that bind women in very different positions, which I really appreciate because I'm like, yeah, they are all women. They all have to kind of find a way to coexist and live with the situations, but but like exploring all these different relationships when they all kind of started in similar-ish positions to now it's very uneven in this world that they really don't have agency or say. And how do you navigate your relationship with the other women that you're basically forced to be with, when some are closer than others. And so yeah, I guess if I was like describing the book, in a buzzy sentence, I'd be like, yeah, it's exploring bonds of female friendship or about female bonds from unequal places.
In times of trauma, yeah. What do you want to see in the second half of the book?
You know, I don't even know what I'm expecting because the first half was so different than what I thought it would be. Because I thought my initial thoughts were when I just look at the cover, it's Women of Troy. I figured that we would get sort of like I thought it would be like 1,000 ships where the women would go and end up in their respective situations, and I thought that we would just hear what happened to them. I did not expect it to still be on the beaches of Troy, and all of them together. So I'm interested to see, does the whole book take place right here? And if so, like that does kind of mess with my idea of a timeline for when the Greeks sacked and left Troy. And yeah, so I'm really excited to see, will the pregnancies unfold, and so will both Briseis and possibly Andromache, like, will they have their children here? Which would imply that, they're there for like 9+ months each, like another year, like, um, because, so much time is spent describing this sense of I don't want it, and also the army wants it and cherishes me. So I would like to see the dynamic once the child is born and like develop how she feels about this child, because I hope there's some kind of resolution that would speak to people like me who don't want, my own biological children, but also something that would then speak to women who did choose to have their own children, and see how her relationship kind of goes. I think that's pretty important. And then obviously not to say that the other women aren't equally as important, but since Briseis kind of is the main character, um and since Andromache is in a similar-ish position, it sounds like, I think I'm most interested in hearing their stories. I mean, Hecuba's fun, kind of as fun as one can be, but in the situation, but they do say she's like old and frail and close to death, and so It'll be good, whatever the however it unfolds, but I'm kind of less interested, sad to say, in that. So yeah, I'm more invested in certain stories than others, but um, and yeah, maybe the developing of of Briseis' relationship with the slaves, and again, I hope to hear from Helen again. What about you?
So I would like to hear more from Helen. Um, I don't logistically, I don't know how that will work because Briseis kind of snuck in the first time, and Helen is so widely disliked that her going in a second might cause problems socially, if we can say that for Briseis. I want to see what happens with Pyrrhus because where we left it, he has a band of men from Skyros with him who are making trouble with the Myrmidons, and he's supposed to be leader of the Myrmidons, but he's like egging these young men from Skyros on. So want to see what happens with him, where he goes. I
Mhm.
desperately want Briseis to have some kind of peace at the end. I don't know that she'll get it. I don't know that it's possible, but I'm going to hope that there is something there after all of this
I
horrificness,
mean,
that she has some kind
yeah.
of
I mean,
peace going forward.
okay, mini prediction though.
So I guess we'll
Do
see.
you think that she will change her mind and eventually like she'll like accept and love this child? Or do you think that she has so much hate and resentment toward the situation that she's not gonna actually end up liking this child?
I don't know. I think it could go either way. I think it could be a thank God I'm not pregnant anymore. Here's a wet nurse. Please take this child away from me. It could also end up being a I have nothing of my own, and this little person is mine, and this is the only relationship maybe that right now I can rely on.
Okay.
So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
I mean,
How about
it
you? Do you have
looks
a
from the surface
strong
like
thoughts either
the
way?
the way that she's talking about how much she really does not feel like it's hers, it's the army's, everyone feels entitled to it, so she's, like, more than happy to, like, not care, but also she uses it as a shield, so I feel like she would want to step up and take ownership, if anything, to defend her own position, but I feel like then that would but I feel like then it's like she'll take ownership of the
That's a
child, but
very
not
good
because she
point.
loves it,
Yeah.
but because she needs it, which is not a good spot. Yeah. So, okay, well, that's kind of a downer to end on, but,
In all honesty, it's Pat Barker. It's depressing as fuck. It's beautifully written, but my God,
yeah.
I am expecting to cry before I end this book.
Yeah, I was like, why don't it's very good and it's very great for analysis, but you know what? I don't feel happy when I analyze or read her books. It's not a pleasant experience reading her book. Um, yeah, yeah, it's not
Yeah.
pleasant. So, anyway, yeah, so that's what we think. Yeah, tell us what you guys think. Drop us an email or whatever, say hi on social media and come back and hear what we think of part two next week.